Hello everyone, welcome back to GraveTales. I know many of you enjoy listening to these videos as you fall asleep. I want you to leave a comment on where in the world you're tuning in from, and if you're enjoying the story, be sure to like and subscribe. Alright, now let's get into tonight's stories. Story 1. I've always had bad luck with dating apps, but that didn't stop me from trying again. After a string of ghostings, cheaters, and one guy who sent me a picture of his gun collection as an icebreaker, I figured I'd give one last swipe on this new app called Glimmer. It was marketed as a slightly more niche, artsy version of Tinder. Smaller user base, but more intentional matches. I wasn't expecting much, just someone normal enough to share a coffee, and maybe a few laughs. That's when I matched with someone named Aaron. His profile wasn't anything spectacular, but it gave me a weirdly comforting feeling. He had one photo, a candid of him laughing, backlit by orange sunlight, and his bio was short and vague, just passing through, looking for real conversation. I messaged him first, joking that his profile made him look like a traveling poet or someone who might try to sell me essential oils. He responded almost immediately, saying, "Haha, not quite, but I like that vibe." We started talking, and something about the way he spoke kept me hooked. He used full sentences, was funny without trying too hard, and asked a lot of questions about me. Things most guys never seem to care about. I should have seen the red flags even then. He never gave straight answers about himself. When I asked what he did for work, he said, "I used to be in law enforcement, but life took a turn." I assumed he meant a career change. When I asked where he was from, he said, "All over, but I'm laying low in the area for a while. Needed a reset." I joked that he sounded like a wanted man, and he replied with a single winking emoji. I remember screenshotting it and sending it to my friend Mandy, asking, "Is this hot or sketchy?" She said, "Hot, get that danger, girl." We laughed. I wish I could go back and scream at myself. After 2 weeks of daily messaging, we agreed to meet. He suggested a hole-in-the-wall coffee shop 2 towns over. I thought it was a little far, but he said he liked the quiet there. Less chance of running into people I know, he added. And something in the way he said that, even in text, gave me a tiny chill. Still, I brushed it off. I drove down on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, telling myself I needed to be more adventurous. The shop was as low-key as promised. Dim lighting, shelves of used books, and maybe 3 other people inside. I saw him immediately. He looked like his picture, but older in a good way. Not aged, just weathered, like someone who'd seen things. He stood up when I approached, pulled out my chair, and said, "You're even prettier in person." The date was actually great. We talked for almost 3 hours. He told me vague stories about working undercover, dropping hints like it got messy in ways I can't talk about, and sometimes the badge doesn't protect you from the people wearing them. I was intrigued, maybe too much. He was charming, sure, but he also had this undercurrent of intensity, like a rubber band stretched tight, waiting to snap. When I asked why he left the force, he looked out the window for a long moment before, saying, "Because sometimes doing the right thing turns you into a criminal." I remember thinking that was the most cryptic thing anyone had ever said to me on a first date. I should have ended things there, but I didn't. We saw each other again and again. I never went to his place. He always said he was between apartments or staying with a buddy. He came to mine a few times, though he never stayed the night. Said he didn't sleep well in unfamiliar beds. Each time he left, I'd find myself sitting in silence, replaying things he said, little things I didn't catch the first time. Once he told me he liked how quiet my apartment was, no nosy neighbors, no one watching. Another time he asked how soundproof my windows were. I laughed it off as a joke, but his eyes didn't. Then one night, everything changed. We were watching a movie on my couch when his phone buzzed, the screen lit up, and I saw the name Eli. He didn't check it, just let it buzz 3 more times before flipping it face down. I asked if everything was okay, and he smiled that same unsettling smile I'd come to recognize as a warning. "Yeah," he said, "just someone I used to work with. He's trying to find me." "Why?" I asked, laughing nervously. "Did you steal his lunch from the break room or something?" "Something like that," he said. Then he leaned closer and added, "Would you still like me if I told you I wasn't who I said I was?" My heart skipped. I played along. "What? Like you're a secret millionaire or something?" He shook his head slowly. "No, more like someone they'd rather see buried than in handcuffs." The silence in my apartment became unbearable. I tried to change the subject. He let it drop, but from that moment on, everything felt wrong. I started Googling him that night after he left. Errand law enforcement, fugitive and cop goes missing under suspicion. Nothing came up that matched, but the deeper I went, the weirder it got. He didn't seem to exist. No social media, no LinkedIn. His number wasn't even from this state. When I reverse searched it, it came back registered to someone named Tyler Reeve from 3 states over. That was the first time I felt genuine fear, not paranoia, not anxiety. Fear, and that was the night I found the article. The article wasn't recent. It was dated almost 3 years ago from a local news site in a small town I'd never heard of. The headline hit me like a gut punch. "Officer killed in apparent ambush. Suspects still at large." My eyes darted across the page, absorbing words in fragments. "Off-duty patrolman. Ambushed outside his home. No witnesses. Suspect fled on foot. Believed armed and dangerous." But what made my blood run cold wasn't the crime itself. It was the suspect. Sketch at the bottom of the article. It wasn't a photo, just a police composite, but it was unmistakably him. The same intense eyes, the sharp cheekbones, the subtle scar across his left eyebrow that he told me came from an old bar fight gone wrong. My heart began racing, palms sweaty against the keyboard. I clicked another link and another. Each one painted a clearer picture. The suspect's name was indeed Tyler Reeve, a former narcotics officer. He had gone off the grid shortly after the murder. Internal reports claimed he had been involved in a series of botched raids and was under investigation for excessive force. Whispers of corruption, abuse of power, and possible ties to a violent group of off-duty officers known only by the nickname the Nine. I remember freezing in place, the quiet hum of my apartment suddenly deafening. The man I had been letting into my home was a fugitive cop killer. I felt nauseous. I wanted to run, scream, burn everything he'd touched, but I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I called Mandy, She answered on the second ring, laughing about some show she was watching until she heard the panic in my voice. "Mandy," I whispered, "I think I'm matched with a murderer." I told her everything, trying to keep my voice down in case, God forbid, he was still nearby. She didn't. Believe me, at first thought I was being dramatic, but when I sent her the article and the sketch, her tone changed immediately. "Jesus Christ," she muttered. That's him, right?" "Yes," I whispered, "and he knows where I live." We agreed I needed to go to the police. Not call, go in person. Mandy offered to drive me, and I met her outside my apartment an hour later, gripping my laptop and every text message he'd sent. At the station, the detective on duty listened carefully, taking notes and nodding, but I could tell something was off. He kept glancing at the door like he was expecting someone to walk in. When I showed him the texts, he stiffened slightly. Then, after a long pause, he said, "We've been looking for this guy for years. If it really is him, you're lucky to be alive." That word "if" made my stomach twist. "It's him," I said. "I swear to God, it's him." He leaned in, lowered his voice. "We've had 3 sightings in the last year. None confirmed. He's smart. He doesn't leave a footprint. But if what you're saying is true, and you've been in close contact, he might already know we're onto him." My blood went cold. "What do you mean?" I asked. He straightened up, suddenly cagey. "Just stay somewhere safe tonight. Somewhere he doesn't know about. We'll be in touch." That was it. No witness protection, no squad cars parked outside my apartment. Just a warning. I left the station feeling more exposed than ever. Mandy insisted I crash at her place, and I did. That night I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind outside her window made me flinch. I kept replaying every moment I'd spent with him, every laugh, every kiss. Every time he'd looked me dead in the eyes and told me he was laying low, I felt violated, like I'd been tricked into letting a wolf wear a sheep's skin and sleep beside me. Around 3 a.m., my phone lit up. It was a text from an unknown number. "I know you told them." That was all it said. No name, no punctuation. Just a confirmation, a threat. I stared at the screen for what felt like an eternity before Mandy noticed my expression. "What is it?" she asked. Sitting up, I showed her. Her face went pale. "You need to block that number." But I couldn't. I needed to keep the evidence. We called the police again. They said they'd escalate it to the task force handling. Reeves' case. Escalate. That was the word they kept using, like this was a budget issue, instead of my life unraveling. Over the next week, I didn't go home. I stayed with Mandy. I quit my job remotely, deleted my dating apps. I was a ghost of myself, jumping at shadows and barely eating. Then, on day 5, Mandy got a flat tire driving back from the grocery store. It was weird because her car was parked in a private garage. No way she just ran over something. When she took it in to be patched, the mechanic pulled a razor blade out of the tread. Intentional, he said. Someone wanted that tire to go. That was the night Mandy begged me to call my parents and go stay with them. I hadn't told them anything yet, but I finally did. My dad drove down the next day, packed my things from my apartment while I sat in the back seat of his truck, clutching a baseball bat and a can of mace. I didn't go inside. I couldn't. I watched from the window as he carried boxes out. One of them, the one from my bedroom closet, was already open. Not torn, just opened, like someone had been looking through it. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to scare him. That night, I moved into my old childhood bedroom. My mom tried to make it feel like home, but I wasn't the same person. I slept with the lights on. My phone kept buzzing with unknown numbers. Sometimes there was no text, just a blank message. Other times it would say things like, "They'll never find me," or "You looked so peaceful when you slept." That last one made me scream. My parents thought I was losing it. My dad even checked the locks every night, even though I already had a deadbolt and a chair propped under the knob. Then, 2 weeks later, I got a call from the detective. He surfaced again. He said, "You were right, it's him. We got a hit off a security camera 3 towns over. He's in the area." I asked what they were doing about it, and his voice changed, flat, serious. "You need to come in. There is something you need to see." When the detective told me I needed to come in, something in his voice made it feel less like a request and more like an order, not harsh, but urgent, like time was suddenly running out. I barely spoke on the drive there. My dad insisted on coming with me, which I appreciated more than I let on. He stayed in the parking lot, chain-smoking with the engine running, while I walked through the precinct doors like I was entering a tomb. The same detective, a stocky, middle-aged guy, named Morales, was waiting by the entrance. He didn't offer a handshake this time, just motioned for me to follow him down a hallway, past desks littered with stale coffee cups and exhausted-looking officers hunched over files. He led me to a small room with no windows and a humming fluorescent light that made everything look jaundiced. On the table was a manila folder, a flash drive, and a cup of water that looked untouched. He sat, motioned for me to do the same, then closed the door behind me with a soft click that made me flinch. "You're not in trouble," he said quickly, reading my face, "but you are deeper in this than you realize." I nodded, already regretting every swipe, every message, every laugh I'd ever shared with that man. Morales opened the folder and slid a few photos toward me. Surveillance stills, grainy black and white, time-stamped from 3 days earlier, showing the inside of a 24-hour diner on the edge of a neighboring town. And there he was, Tyler, Aaron, whatever his name was, sitting in a booth, facing the camera, eyes like knives. Even in low resolution, he was watching the front entrance, not eating, not drinking, just waiting. He was there for over an hour, Morales said. Didn't order a thing, just watched. Then he left without speaking to anyone. I didn't understand. "Why are you showing me this?" Morales tapped the next photo. "Look at the timestamp. Then look at the woman in the background." My stomach sank. It was me, walking past the window outside, less than 20 feet from him, oblivious. I remember that night. I'd gone to the gas station across the street to buy Advil. I'd walked right past that diner, probably humming to myself, maybe texting Mandy. He'd been inside, watching me. "We think he's been following you longer than you know." Morales said, "We pulled footage from around your apartment. He was never on camera, never left prints, but this was sloppy. It tells us 2 things. 1, he's getting bold. 2, He's getting emotional. I felt the tears rising and forced them back. So, what now? I asked, do I go into witness protection? Do you guys stake out my house? What are we doing? Morales leaned forward, voice low. We're doing what we can, but this guy, he's like a ghost. No digital trail, no known aliases. Every time we get close, he disappears. We think, he has help. Maybe someone inside that stopped me cold. Inside the police, he didn't answer, which was answer enough. He slid a small printout across the table. It was a scan of a handwritten note, block letters, jagged, uneven. She talks, she dies. Where did you find this? I asked, voice shaking, wedged under the windshield wiper of my car. He said, yesterday morning. I stared at the paper, bile rising in my throat. He knows I came here, I whispered. Morales nodded. And that's why you need to be careful. We can't protect you 24/7. You need to change routines. Don't post online. Don't trust anyone who shows up unannounced. I left the station in a daze, gripping the sides of the passenger seat as my dad drove me home. He kept glancing over like he wanted to ask questions, but didn't. I was grateful for the silence. That night, I tried to sleep in my childhood bed, but it was impossible. Every sound, every creak, every distant bark or car door sounded like footsteps. I kept the bat beside me and stared at the ceiling, waiting for something I couldn't name. Around 2 a.m., I heard something. A tap, soft, deliberate. I sat up, heart in my throat. Another tap. I moved to the window and peeked through the blinds. Nothing. The yard was empty, bathed in the pale glow of a single porch light. I stood there for almost 5 minutes, not blinking. Then my phone buzzed. No caller ID. I answered without thinking, whispering, hello. No voice, just breathing. Then a click. I dropped the phone and backed away from the window. My dad came rushing in, saw my face, and didn't ask questions. We called Morales again. His line went to voicemail. We left a message. Then another. Then gave up. For the next week, it was like living in a pressure cooker. My mum started sleeping on the couch with a butcher knife under the cushion. My dad boarded up the windows in my room. I stopped checking my phone altogether. Then one night, Mandy called, not texted, called. I hadn't heard her voice in days. She sounded off, slurred. Hey, she said, you need to come over. Mandy, I asked, are you okay? Yeah, she said, too quickly. Just, please, come over now. I hesitated. Why? What's going on? She was silent for a long moment. Then she whispered, he's here. Click. The line went dead. I screamed for my dad, grabbed the bat, and jumped into the truck. My parents tried to stop me, but I didn't listen. Mandy was the only one who'd believed me, who'd protected me, and now she was in danger because of me. The drive felt endless. I didn't even wait for the engine to stop. I ran to her door and found it cracked open. No lights, no sounds, just darkness and the faint scent of something chemical. I stepped inside, every nerve in my body screaming. Mandy, I called. It's me. Where are you? Nothing. Then, from the hallway, a soft voice. In here. I followed it like an idiot, like every dumb girl in every horror movie. I found her in the bathroom, sitting against the wall. blood on her sleeve. Her eyes were glassy, pupils blown wide. She looked up at me and said, "He said not to scream." Then she passed out. Before I could even move, I heard the front door creak shut behind me. The sound of the front door creaking shut behind me hit like a detonated silence, so small and slow and inevitable that my heart seemed to stop in its tracks, my brain clawing at the moment, screaming to undo the choice that brought me here. My hand went to Mandy's shoulder, shaking her gently at first, then harder. "Mandy," I whispered, wake up, please." Her head lolled to the side, lips parted, breath shallow. I couldn't tell if it was blood on her sleeve or something else. The smell was sharp and bitter, not coppery like I expected. Something chemical, something wrong. I looked around the bathroom quickly. The cabinet doors were ajar. The contents inside looked ransacked, and the hand towel on the sink was soaked red, dripping down into the bowl like a slow hourglass. Her phone lay shattered on the floor beside her. I wanted to pick it up, to call for help, but I couldn't take my eyes off the hallway, the thick, creeping darkness that seemed to swell like it was breathing. I reached for the bat I'd brought, still gripped tight in my hand, the wood already damp with sweat. I backed away from the bathroom slowly, dragging Mandy by the wrist until she was out of the doorway and into the living room carpet, each movement feeling louder than the last. That's when I heard it. A soft knock, not on the door, not on a wall, but from inside. A knock on the back of the closet door in Mandy's hallway. Just once, measured, intentional. I froze. I wanted to scream, but my body wouldn't let me. The knock came again, just one, then nothing. I didn't think. I moved. I hauled Mandy's unconscious body behind the couch, ducking low, trying to be invisible. I didn't even breathe. The room was silent, not the kind of peaceful quiet, but the kind where the walls themselves seemed to be holding their breath, waiting. Then I heard the closet door creak open. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, bare feet on wood. My heart pounded so loud I was sure whoever it was could hear it. I couldn't see him, not yet, but I felt him. That presence, that choking, suffocating tension in the air that always came when he was nearby. It was like he brought a shadow with him, something that sank into every surface and whispered through the drywall. I stayed crouched, eyes locked on the edge of the couch, waiting for that flicker of movement that would tell me where he was. Then I saw it, a hand sliding along the back of the armchair across from me. Just fingers at first, trailing lazily, like they were savoring the feel of the fabric. Then a silhouette emerged. It was him, Tyler, or Aaron, or whatever name he was wearing now. He looked exactly the same, maybe thinner, maybe darker around the eyes, but unmistakably him. He wasn't holding a weapon. He didn't need to. His presence was the weapon. He stood in the center of the room, looking around like he was in a museum exhibit. Then he spoke softly, like he was talking to a child. "You told them?" he said. "I knew you would. You seemed brave, but not that brave." I didn't move, didn't blink. He walked to the TV stand, picked up a framed photo of me and Mandy from 2 summers ago, holding cocktails at the beach, sunburned and smiling, and stared at it for a long time. "You know what hurts the most?" he said. "I actually liked you. I really, truly liked you. You asked me questions no one else cared about. You listened, You made me feel real." He set the photo down slowly, like it was made of glass. Then his voice shifted, took on that low, rumbling edge I'd only ever seen surface once before, when he talked about betrayal. "And then you sold me out. I couldn't take it. I bolted. Ran straight from behind the couch, through the kitchen, kicked open the back door so hard it nearly ripped from the hinges." I heard him shout behind me, not a word, just a primal sound, a deep, animalistic growl that sent a spike of terror through my spine. I sprinted into Mandy's backyard, barefoot, stumbling over roots and flower beds and garden hoses, not even knowing where I was going. Just away, I heard his footsteps behind me, faster now, heavier. I darted around the side of the house, jumped the low fence into her neighbor's yard, and screamed when I felt a hand graze my shoulder. But it wasn't him, it was a bush. I kept running. A porch light flicked on somewhere. A dog started barking, and then, blessedly, sirens, close, very close. I didn't stop running until I saw the red and blue strobes bouncing through the street trees, and I collapsed in the middle of the road, arms flailing, throat raw from screaming. The cops found me there, shaking, bloodied, barefoot. They rushed past me into Mandy's house. She survived. Barely. They said she'd been drugged with a paralytic, something homebrewed, designed to incapacitate but not kill. Her tongue was swollen for days. She couldn't even talk until the 4th day in the hospital. When she finally could, all she said was, he was already in the house. Tyler had broken in hours before I arrived. He'd waited in her closet, drugged her water, and used her phone to lure me there. The whole thing was a trap. The cops swarmed the neighborhood, kicked in doors, set up checkpoints. He was gone. Not a single trace left behind. No fingerprints, no fibers, not even a footprint in the mud behind her house. He vanished. Again. The story made local news, of course. Woman lured by fugitive killer in terrifying home ambush. They showed blurry images of his face, replayed my 911 call on the evening news, even aired a brief interview with Mandy. Once she recovered enough to speak, but the police were no closer to finding him. Morales told me privately that they suspected Tyler had been getting help from someone on the inside, someone feeding him police movements, access points, roadblocks. That's why he always knew when to run, why he was always one step ahead. I asked Morales how they planned to catch him. He said, "We don't. We wait for him to screw up. And if he doesn't, we just hope he doesn't pick another target." I moved 3 times after that, changed my name legally, got a new phone, deleted every app, went off social media. I even started dyeing my hair. I lived like a shadow, always looking over my shoulder, always checking locks twice, always keeping a bag packed by the door in case I had to run again. It's been 7 months since that night. No contact, no sightings, no messages. I started to let myself believe. Maybe, just maybe, it was over. Maybe he'd moved on. Maybe the police finally caught up to him quietly. But last week I got a package, no return address. Inside was a single Polaroid. My parents sitting on their front porch, laughing, drinking lemonade, completely unaware that someone had taken the photo from no more than 10 feet away. I stared at the Polaroid for so long that the edges of the image began to blur from my trembling grip. My eyes locked on that too-perfect photo of my parents on the porch, a moment of serenity so cruelly stolen and weaponized. The sun in the picture was low, either late morning or early evening, and I knew just by looking at the light that it had been taken the day before. My parents wore the same clothes they'd had on when I FaceTimed them around noon, which meant he'd been there in their yard, within arm's reach, close enough to breathe the same air as them, just hours before I opened the envelope. I felt my legs give out and drop to the kitchen floor, the photo fluttering from my hand like an accusation. He knew where they lived. Of course he did. He'd followed me there once. Hell, maybe he'd been watching the whole time, laughing at how small I'd made my world just to feel safe. I called Morales immediately, breath ragged, words tripping over each other as I explained what I found. He didn't even ask me to bring it in, just said, "We're on our way. Don't touch anything else." Within 20 minutes, 2 unmarked cars pulled up to the curb of my current hideaway, a basement apartment rented under a fake name in a sleepy part of town. Morales was one of the men who came in. His face had new lines since the last time I saw him. He looked tired in a way that made me wonder if I was his only case or just the one that kept him up at night. I handed him the Polaroid. He stared at it in silence, then pulled on gloves and slipped it into an evidence sleeve. I expected questions, strategy, even anger, but all he said was, "He's escalating." I asked if they could protect my parents. Morales nodded, but it was the kind of nod you give someone who asks if you'll try your best. Not a guarantee. They posted an unmarked cruiser on their street, but it was clear they didn't think he'd come back. Not soon. Not while we were braced for it. And maybe they were right. Maybe he enjoyed pulling back just when we thought we'd cornered him, only to remind us we were never in control. That night, I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. I sat on the floor beside the door with a knife in my lap, listening to the refrigerator hum, the pipes groan, the wind whistle under the crack of the window pane. Every sound was a threat. Every silence was worse. The next morning, there was a knock on the door. I nearly passed out. It was too soft to be police, more like a casual tap, friendly. Even I grabbed the knife and moved to the peephole. No one was there. My hands shook as I reached for the lock, but I didn't open it. I waited 5 minutes, 10, then I heard something slide under the door, a small white envelope, plain, no name. I stared at it like it might explode. When I finally got the courage to open it, I found only one thing inside, a drawing, crude pencil on notepad paper. It was a sketch of me, sleeping. The style was cartoonish, almost childlike, but the detail was horrifying. The shape of my jaw, the tangle of my hair, the position I slept in, facing the wall, knees tucked. He'd been watching again, from where, through a window, inside the room, I searched every inch of the apartment that day, inside vents, under the bed, behind cabinets, even inside the walls where I could tap and listen. I found nothing. No bugs, no cameras, no signs of forced entry. Morales had the place swept again and came up empty. "He's good," he said. "Too good. I told them I wanted to leave. Get out. Change cities. Change countries if I had to." But Morales said it wouldn't help. He'll follow if he's this fixated. he'll always find you. That word, fixated, sank in like a needle under the skin. That's when it hit me. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This wasn't just some fugitive covering his tracks. This was about me. I had become the story in his head. I had become the anchor in his broken world. He didn't want to kill me, not yet. He wanted me to know he was always there, that I couldn't forget him, that I didn't have permission to move on. A few days later, I noticed something strange. My social media, which I hadn't used in months, started getting activity. New likes on old photos. A comment from an account I didn't recognize. Remember, this day, you looked so happy. The account had no profile picture, no posts, just a single follower, me. I tried to report it, but it vanished seconds after I blocked it. That night, I found a USB drive taped to the underside of my mailbox. I didn't plug it into my laptop. I wasn't stupid. I drove it straight to the precinct and handed it off. To Morales, he called me 3 hours later. His voice was dry, flat. "You don't want to see what's on it," he said, "but you need to hear this." He played me an audio clip, maybe 20 seconds long, recorded in near silence. At first, I couldn't tell what I was hearing. Then I recognized it. Breathing, my breathing, slow, steady, rhythmic. I was sleeping. The mic had to be inches from my face. And then, faintly, his voice whispered, "Still beautiful, even when you dream." I vomited in the parking lot outside the precinct. I begged them for protection, relocation, anything. Morales promised they were pulling every resource they had, but his face said what his words didn't. They weren't going to catch him. Not until he made a mistake. Not until he wanted to be caught. And right now, he didn't. He was playing, toying. I went underground again, left everything, changed my name a second time, got a burner phone. I stayed in a woman's shelter too. States over for 3 months under an alias, while the police pretended to chase shadows. For a while, it worked. No messages, no sightings, no packages. Then last week, I got an email from a university address I didn't recognize. The subject line was blank. The body just said, "I miss you, the way your lips twitch when you're dreaming, the way your fingers curl under the blanket. You don't talk in your sleep anymore." I wonder why. He was back, watching again, somewhere, somehow. I don't know where I'll go next. I don't know if there's anywhere left that he hasn't touched. Sometimes I wonder if he's inside the walls, if he's living in crawl spaces, attics, ducts. I keep hearing small creaks and dismissing them, then doubting myself, then hating myself for dismissing them. I don't know who I am anymore without fear in the room. It's like he rewired my brain to expect him, to crave the terror as a constant companion. Morales retired last month. He called to say goodbye, said he was sorry he couldn't do more. He'll slip up one day, he told me. People like him always do, but I don't believe that anymore. I think this is his masterpiece. Not killing me, keeping me alive, keeping me haunted, keeping me his. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and find my closet door open, just an inch, just wide enough for someone to watch from the darkness. And sometimes I think I see eyes. There's something I didn't tell the police, not even Morales, not even Mandy, and if I'm being honest, I don't know if I'm saying it now as a confession or a plea for someone to understand what's happening to me. It started small. Like everything else, a flicker, a shadow I thought I imagined, a sound I heard while half asleep, but lately there are gaps, whole stretches of time where I black out, not in the movie sense, not full-on amnesia, but like time skips, subtle enough to question but long enough to feel real. I'll blink and find myself standing in a different room than the one I remember walking into. I'll check the stove and see I've already cooked something I don't remember preparing. I'll find bruises on my thighs, faint marks on my arms, like someone gripped me in my sleep. At first, I blamed the trauma, the insomnia, the pills they gave me to take the edge off. But then I started finding things in the trash I know I didn't put there. An empty sandwich wrapper from a place I haven't eaten at in over a year. A stained piece of notebook paper with his handwriting on it. I recognized the loops, the jagged strokes with nothing written on it except "You're still mine." I tore it up and flushed it, then spent the next 2 hours checking every lock, every window, every inch of drywall for signs that someone had drilled a hole or slipped in while I wasn't looking. That night, I set up my phone on the dresser to record myself sleeping. I didn't even expect to catch anything. I thought it was another paranoid compulsion, a comfort blanket wrapped in digital logic. But in the morning, I reviewed the footage and felt my stomach clench before I'd even reached the halfway point. Around 2:16 a.m., the room grows darker, not like the lights change, like the air itself thickens. The video distorts slightly, static lines flickering near the corners. I see myself roll over, restless. Then, at 2:19 a.m., I stop moving, dead still. My breathing slows, my limbs go rigid. I look paralyzed. Then, from the lower corner of the frame, something moves, slowly, something tall, a shape vague and indistinct at first. But as it steps forward into the faint ambient light, I can make out the outlined shoulders too broad, head tilted slightly to the side, arms at its sides. The thing that stops me cold isn't its face. It's the way it moves, like it knows it's being watched, like it wants me to see it later. It stands at the foot of my bed for 17 minutes, not moving, just watching. Then it turns and walks away, but it doesn't exit through the door. It moves toward the closet, and just before it slips out of frame, it turns its head, and for a single frame, I swear it smiles. I shut off the video and screamed until my throat gave out. I brought it to a tech at a local repair shop, said I wanted to make sure it wasn't corrupted. He plugged it in, watched it silently, then stood up and left the room without a word. Came back 10 minutes later and handed me a new flash drive. "Don't come back here," he said. "Whatever this is, I don't want any part of it." I left that town the next day. I didn't pack. I just walked out and kept walking. Found a motel off a highway 3 hours away, paid in cash, gave a fake name, told the clerk I didn't want housekeeping. I slept during the day and stayed awake. All night, back to the wall, staring at the door with a hammer in my hand. No phone, no internet, nothing. Just me and the silence. And yet, I still felt him. Not just the fear. Him, like he'd been stitched into my skin. Like he was somewhere in the fabric of the room, just behind the plaster or inside the goddamn pipes. On the third night, I woke up on the bathroom floor, fully clothed. My hands were wet. There were scratches on the mirror, like fingernails had scraped it in a frenzy. And on the glass, written in steam that hadn't come from me, were the words, "You talk in your sleep again." I don't remember anything from that night. I don't even remember falling asleep. But when I checked my phone, the burner I'd turned off and hidden in my shoe, it was on, and there was a new video on it, a front-facing selfie of me, staring blankly dead-eyed, whispering a name I didn't recognize, over and over, Nathaniel, Nathaniel, Nathaniel. The video ends with a whisper I can't mistake, his voice behind the camera saying, "That's better." I took the phone apart, smashed it to pieces, and flushed the SIM card down the toilet. I haven't left that motel room in 9 days. I'm down to vending machine food and tap water. The clerk doesn't knock anymore. I think she's scared of me now. I don't blame her. I barely recognize myself in the mirror. My skin is gray. My teeth feel loose. I haven't spoken out loud in a week, afraid that if I do, I won't be the one speaking. Sometimes I hear him whispering through the static of the old motel TV, even when it's unplugged. Sometimes I wake up to find messages scrawled on the walls in black Sharpie, always the same word, remember. And worst of all, sometimes I smile in the dark, alone, and I don't know why. I don't know if this is psychological collapse or something worse. I don't know if he's broken my mind or found a way inside it. All I know is that he's not trying to kill me anymore. He's trying to rewrite me, to make me forget who I was before him, to shape me into the kind of woman who never tells the police, who never fights back, who keeps the door unlocked. And the scariest part, I think it might be working. I think he's wearing me down, piece by piece, until all that's left is his version of me, the one who whispers his name in her sleep, the one who never leaves, the one who doesn't run anymore. So here I am, writing this down, just in case I don't make it out. Just in case one morning I wake up and don't remember why I should be afraid. Just in case I stop being me altogether. Because if that happens, if I stop writing, stop resisting, stop remembering, then he wins. And someone needs to know what happened. Someone needs to know what he did to me, what he's still doing. Because if you ever see a woman who looks like me, walking down the street with a blank stare and a man too close behind her, don't call out, don't wave, don't try to talk to her, she won't answer, because that won't be me anymore. I don't know how long I've been in this motel room anymore. The cheap wallpaper has started to peel like old skin, and the air smells like mildew and motel soap, and something else I can't quite name, like static and rot. I've lost the thread of time. Nights bleed into days without warning, and the clock on the nightstand blinks 12 o'clock every time I open my eyes, no matter when I last looked. I tried keeping track with tally marks scratched into the drywall, but they never stay where I put them. Some mornings there are fewer than I remember making. Other mornings they've moved, curved, slanted, reshaped into symbols I don't recognize. On the 11th day, or what I think was the 11th, the marks formed a single word, Nathaniel. I froze when I saw it, the pen falling from my hand. That name again. I still don't know who Nathaniel is. I've never known a Nathaniel, but I say it in my sleep. I whisper it when I'm pacing. I caught myself writing it over and over in the margins of a phone book I found in the drawer, and I have no memory of doing it. Sometimes I say it aloud and my voice doesn't sound like mine, it's slower, more deliberate, like I'm speaking with borrowed breath. I haven't spoken to another living person in almost 2 weeks. I don't even look at the motel clerk anymore. She stopped making eye contact after she heard me talking to the faucet, and I don't blame her, because the faucet talks back. I hear whispers when I let it run, not from the pipes, from the water itself, like it carries voices, like it remembers. I caught a phrase one night that made my skin crawl. "You're almost ready." I yanked the knob off the sink and wrapped the whole thing in duct tape, but sometimes I still hear it dripping when I lie down to sleep. I've started sleeping in the closet, not because I feel safe, because I don't want to be seen. The room has mirrors, and I've taped bed sheets over every one. But even through the fabric, I sometimes catch flickers, like the reflection is moving when I'm still, like something is trapped behind the glass and tapping to get out. I recorded myself again, against my better judgment. Just a single night, just audio. I set my phone beside the bed and hit record, then tried to sleep. I lasted maybe 3 hours before waking to the sound of breathing, heavy, not mine. I listened to the playback the next morning and nearly dropped the phone. From 2:16 to 3:02 a.m., there's breathing, long, slow, steady, and the sound of footsteps pacing slowly from one end of the room to the other. Then, at 3:04, a voice, mine, says, "I'm still here," followed by a voice that is definitely not mine, not for long. I ran to the bathroom and threw up, then sat on the tile for 2 hours, clutching the toilet like it was the only anchor left. I called Morales, even though I knew he was retired, even though I swore I'd cut off contact. He picked up on the third ring. "You shouldn't be calling me," he said, but his voice cracked. I told him everything, the name, the recordings, the messages. He was silent for a long time. Then he said, "I wasn't supposed to tell you this, but when we raided Tyler's apartment years ago, the one he vanished from, we found something." I held my breath. A room hidden behind a false wall, no windows, floor covered in salt, mirrors shattered and arranged in a circle, pages stapled to the drywall. All of them had that name, Nathaniel. Some of the officers refused to go back inside, said they felt watched. He paused, and the smell was like burnt hair and electricity, like something had been there that wasn't supposed to be. My skin prickled as I sat up straighter. "What does it mean?" I asked. "I don't know," he said. But it wasn't just murder with him. It was devotion, like he believed he was following something or becoming something. I didn't sleep after that. I started going through my old notebooks, old journals, just to convince myself I was still real, that my memories hadn't been rewritten. But something was wrong. In one of my oldest journals from high school, I found a page I didn't recognize. Not my handwriting, not my pen, just a single phrase scrawled in black. "Ink, he finds you in the forgetting." I slammed it shut and tossed it in the trash, then dug it out 3 hours later because I couldn't let it go. I sat there, tracing the words with my finger, trying to remember if I'd written them in some fugue state, some trauma-drenched blackout. But the ink was faded. The paper was yellowed. It had aged. That page had been in that book for years. And that's when the real fear started to sink in. The kind that wraps around your spine like ice water and whispers that maybe, just maybe, this didn't start with him. Maybe I didn't just match with a killer. Maybe something wanted me to. Maybe the story was already written. Sometimes I dream of an old house. I don't know where it is, but it feels familiar. It's always dark inside, and I never make it past the hallway. There's a mirror at the end, and when I get close, I see someone else's face in it. Not Tyler's, not mine. Someone older, gaunt eyes like cracked glass. And every time I wake up, the closet door is open, even if I locked it. Even if I nailed it shut. Last night, there was a note taped to the inside of the door. Not written in pen, scratched into the wood. It just said, "It's time to come home." I don't know what that means. I don't know where home is, but I can feel myself slipping. Every night I sleep, I wake up less sure of who I am, less sure I ever had a life before this. Sometimes I hear him breathing inside my thoughts, and sometimes I catch myself smiling when I hear it. I tried to leave the motel again, not because I thought I could escape. I gave up that fantasy weeks ago, but because I needed to feel the air on my face, to know I still existed in something bigger than this room, this orbit of shadows and hallucinated memories. I packed what little I had, a change of clothes, a half-dead burner phone, the last granola bar from the vending machine. When I opened the door, the world outside had changed. The parking lot was gone, not empty. Gone, in its place, was a corridor of identical motel doors, stretching in both directions like a funhouse hallway reflected in infinite mirrors. I stepped outside and shut the door behind me, thinking maybe it was a trick, a hallucination, some kind of spatial loop my brain was inventing. But the air smelled the same as it always had. Damp carpet, rotted insulation, that faint coppery tint that reminded me of old blood. I started walking. The numbers on the doors were wrong. They weren't sequential. They weren't even numbers. Just combinations of symbols, crosses, hourglasses, the same spiral I'd seen behind my eyelids. When I tried to sleep, some of the doors were pulsing. Breathing, I passed one with a doorknob that turned as I approached. Even though I didn't touch it, I kept moving. After maybe an hour, I stopped in front of a door that had a mirror nailed to it. Not a hotel. Mirror, not glass, but something wrong, like liquid silver held in place by barely contained skin. My own reflection didn't look like me anymore. She was smiling. Her eyes were black, and her mouth didn't close right. When she raised her hand to wave, mine stayed still. I turned and ran. I sprinted past dozens of doors, all the same, all humming low and wet, like something slithered behind the wood. The corridor never ended. There were no windows, no signs, just an infinite echo of my own footfalls and the quiet sound of breathing that never seemed to come from me. Eventually, I found another door that looked like mine, minus 108, scratched into the metal with what looked like fingernails. I didn't hesitate. I threw it open, heart pounding, desperate to believe it was over. But inside wasn't the same. It was a replica, a shadow version of my room. The bed was sunken in as if someone had been lying in it for years. The mirror was missing. The closet was open, but instead of clothes, It was filled floor to ceiling with VHS tapes, all unlabeled. I picked one up and it was warm. I don't know why I put it in the old VCR beneath the TV. I think I was past the point of caring. The screen came to life instantly. No static, no tracking, just an image. Me, sitting in this exact room, wearing clothes I hadn't owned in years, smiling, rocking slowly in the corner. The footage sped up like a time-lapse. I never moved. Days passed. The lighting changed. Mold crept up the walls. But I never moved. I just sat and stared into the lens like I knew I was being watched. At one point, maybe 2 hours into the footage, another figure entered the frame. Tall, angular, moving with unnatural grace, like its limbs bent the wrong way. It stood behind me, hand on my shoulder, whispering something. I never reacted. I nodded. I yanked the tape from the player and smashed it on the floor. Black film spilled out like intestines. The closet door slammed shut behind me on its own. I didn't stay. I ran. Again, I wandered the halls until my feet bled, until the doors blurred together and the hum of the place became a physical pressure in my ears. Eventually, I found my real room again. I hope. It's hard to tell. Anymore, the bed is different now. Bigger, the sheets are embroidered with symbols I can't read. The corners of the room feel further apart, and the closet no longer has a door. Just an opening draped in thick velvet like a stage curtain. I don't go near it. Sometimes I hear voices from inside. My voice, Mandy's voice, Morales's voice, my mother's, all calling me by name. Not the name I was born with. The other one, Nathaniel. I've started writing it without thinking. On the walls, the windows, the soles of my feet, I dream in third person now, always watching myself. Sometimes the dreamy does things I don't remember doing. She smiles at nothing, whispers into cracks in the drywall, cuts into her own arms with a jagged piece of mirror and carves letters I can't translate. Then I wake up and the cuts are there, faded, half-healed, like they happened weeks ago. There's a photo in the drawer now, a new one, Polaroid. Me and him, standing together in front of a house I don't recognize. My head is tilted against his shoulder. I look happy, radiant even. The sky is grey and the trees behind us are leafless, skeletal, but we look whole. The date scrawled on the back says, next week. I tore it up, burned it in the sink, flushed the ashes. That night I woke up with a new photo tucked under. My pillow, same image, new message on the back. This one says, you'll remember soon. I don't know what I'm forgetting. I don't know what he's waiting for. But I can feel it coming. A shift like a storm rolling beneath the surface of the world, waiting to break open the seams. And when it does, I don't know if I'll survive it. I don't even know if I want to, because some nights only. Some I find myself standing at the velvet curtain with my hand reaching forward, not shaking, not resisting, welcoming. The first time I stepped through the velvet curtain, I don't think I did it consciously. I remember standing in front of it, bare feet on sticky carpet, heart thudding against my ribs like it wanted out, and I remember the sensation of fabric brushing across my face, soft and cold like wet silk, but I don't remember deciding to move. I just remember being beyond it. The room on the other side was unlike anything in the motel or anywhere for that matter. It was circular, too perfect. The walls were stone, or at least they looked like stone, grey and wet and veined with hairline cracks that pulsed faintly, as if the room itself had a heartbeat. There were no windows, no lights, but I could see everything. The air glowed with a dim bioluminescent haze that reminded me of deep-sea creatures, and in the center of the room was a chair, old, wooden, ornate. I knew it was for me before I ever touched it. Sitting in that chair felt right, like the final movement of a symphony I never knew I'd been conducting, like the answer to a question buried in the marrow of my bones. As soon as I sat, the walls began to whisper. Not voices, memories. My memories, all of them. Spilling out in reverse, I saw my childhood, my first scraped knee, the time my father left, the first boy I ever kissed, my college dorm, every tiny heartbreak and skipped step of a life I had always believed was mine. But something was wrong. In every memory I caught a shape in the background, tall, thin, still watching, sometimes in the mirror, sometimes in a crowd, sometimes carved into the wood grain of a door. Always there, unblinking, waiting. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body wouldn't move. I was paralyzed in the chair as the room filled with smoke, not fire smoke, but the kind you see in old cathedrals, thick and perfumed with something ancient, something sacred. The chair shifted beneath me, almost imperceptibly, and I realized it wasn't a chair. It was a throne, and carved into the arms, in a language I don't speak, but somehow understood, was the name Nathaniel. Not a man, not a memory, a title, a role, a pattern repeating through centuries, handed down like a mask. And I was next. It hit me like a punch to the chest. I hadn't just met a killer on a dating app. I had been chosen, not by accident, not by chance, but by ritual, by blood. Tyler, Aaron, whatever name he'd worn when I matched with him, he wasn't a person. He was a vessel, just like I was becoming, a pair, a cycle, a god and his bride. The messages, the stalking, the photos, they weren't about obsession. They were about initiation, breaking me down, removing the false layers, making me soft enough to accept what I was meant to carry. My head spun. I felt my body twitch. In rhythm with the heartbeat of the stone, I felt a pressure behind my eyes, like someone trying to look out from inside my skull. Then I heard his voice, closer than it had ever been, not outside, not around me, within. "Do you see now?" he asked. "Do you understand why you couldn't leave?" I opened my mouth to scream, but all that came out was a word. One word, soft, surrendered. Yes, I blacked out. When I woke up, I was back in my bed. The velvet curtain was gone. So was the closet. The entire wall had been sealed over with fresh drywall, as if it had never existed. The furniture was different. The layout had shifted, but it was still the motel. I opened the door. The hallway was back to normal. The parking lot was visible through the window. The sky was grey, heavy with clouds, but real, tangible. For the first time in weeks, maybe longer, the motel felt like the real world again. But I wasn't the same. My reflection no longer mirrored me. It lagged. I caught it watching me after I turned away, smiling and sometimes, just for a second, I see Tyler standing behind me in the glass. Not how he looked before, but how he looked in the dreams. Taller, darker, crowned in shadow, his mouth whispering. Symbols instead of words. I haven't left a motel, even though I could. The door opens now. Cars pass outside. The world has returned, but I won't go. I can't go, because the throne is still inside me. I feel it in my spine, etched into the bones like roots from something ancient. And at night I speak in languages I never learned. I write symbols I've never seen. I sleep with my eyes open. I dream of other women, other rooms, other times. And in each of them there's a man, a watcher, a guide, a prophet of the blood-soaked pattern. And all of them bear the same name, Nathaniel. And all of them loved their chosen the same way, with fire, with fear, with faith. Last night I woke up sitting in the center of the room, candles lit around me in a perfect spiral. My hands were burned, my eyes stung from smoke, and carved into the floor, in symbols I now understand but cannot speak aloud, was a name I had never written before. My own, not the name I was given, not the name I was born with, the one I now wear like a crown. I don't cry anymore. I don't fight it. I've stopped wondering when the horror will end, because it hasn't, because it already did. It ended when I accepted what I was, when I stopped running, when I looked into the mirror and saw not a victim, not a survivor, but a priestess, an offering, an heir. I think soon I'll leave the room again, not to run, not to hide, but to find, to seek out the next one, the next chosen, the next reflection. I'll walk into their life the same way he walked into mine, with a smile, a story, a name that isn't mine, and I'll love them, I will, fiercely, deeply, eternally, until they remember to, until they sit in the chair, until they say yes. I'm not sure how much time has passed since that night in the circular room, since I sat in the throne and said yes to whatever twisted legacy was handed down through centuries. But every day and every night bleed into one another in a haze of shifting memories and fractured reality. The motel no longer feels like a place. It feels like a tomb, a waiting room for the inevitable, a crucible where the old world burns away and something unholy rises in its place. I've tried to reach out, to call Morales one last time, but my voice cracks when I speak his name, like saying it aloud pulls me deeper into this shadow. I've seen Mandy in my dreams, but she's always distant, unreachable, fading like smoke before I can grasp her. The mirror in the bathroom is cracked now, fractured into spiderweb veins that spread across the glass like a poison bloom. When I look into it, I don't just see myself. I see the faces of the women whose photographs were hidden beneath the trapdoor, eyes hollow and accusing, mouths frozen in silent screams, their reflections flickering behind mine like ghosts trapped in glass. The scratches on my skin have deepened into scars shaped like symbols I don't understand but can feel embedded in my flesh, an inescapable map of pain and ownership. At times I feel like I'm losing control, like the voice inside my head, the one that speaks in cold whispers, is no longer just a passenger but the driver. It tells me what to do, what to say, who to be, and sometimes I obey without question. I've found myself leaving notes in the dead of night, cryptic, urgent warnings, and invitations all at once. But I have no memory of writing them, no memory of leaving my room. One note was pinned to the motel door yesterday morning, written in a shaky, unfamiliar hand. She remembers. You must prepare. Prepare for what? I don't know. But the fear in those words settled over me like a shroud. I am haunted by dreams of Tyler, or whoever he was before becoming Nathaniel's vessel, standing in the rain outside my childhood home. A shadow stretched long behind him. His eyes are empty pits now, but I feel his gaze bore through me, a silent promise or curse. The line between him and me blurs until I can't tell who is dreaming whom. Sometimes I wake with my hands clenched into fists, nails digging into my palms, and words written on my skin that weren't there before. The bride is ready. There's a twisted sense of inevitability in it, a whispered prophecy that I both dread and strangely crave. I can't leave this place any more. The world outside feels like a fading dream, something I used to know, but that's now just out of reach. The motel corridors twist and reform, hallways that stretch and collapse, doors that appear and disappear like memories in a storm. And always, just beyond my sight, the velvet curtain waits, inviting, insistent. The other night, I found myself standing in front of it again, heart pounding, breath caught in my throat. I reached out and pulled it aside, stepping into the circular room once more. The throne was waiting, and this time, when I sat, I understood. This isn't just a curse or a legacy. It's a covenant, a binding contract written in blood and bone, passed through time by those who refuse to die, who live on by claiming others as their own. I am no longer a victim, no longer prey. I am the next in the line, the bride of a ghost who kills cops, who vanished into the shadows, who wears faces like masks and leaves bodies in his wake, but who is more than a man. I am his heir, his partner, his shadow made flesh. And as I sit in this throne, the walls pulse with ancient power and whisper secrets I dare not speak aloud. I realize that this story isn't over. It's just beginning. Because somewhere out there, maybe in the depths of the next dating app, the next small town, the next broken life, there's someone else who will match with him. Someone else who will never see it coming. And I will be there, waiting, watching, loving, until the cycle turns again, until the chair is filled, until the word is said, Nathaniel. The days here have lost all meaning. Time is a distant concept, like a forgotten song that hums beneath the surface of my mind, barely audible, but never truly gone. I'm trapped in a haze of flickering images, fractured memories, and whispered voices that curl around me like smoke, smothering and seductive all at once. Every mirror I pass no longer reflects just me, but a fractured mosaic of faces, some familiar, some terrifyingly unknown, layered over my own like a mask made of nightmares. I catch glimpses of Tyler, Nathaniel, and the countless others who came before him, their eyes black voids that pull at the edges of my sanity. And I know they watch me, waiting for me to fully become what I was meant to be. The scars etched into my skin pulse with an unholy energy, a map of ancient rites and forgotten promises, and when I touch them, it feels as though the lines bleed beneath my flesh, rewriting who I am at the cellular level. I find myself drawn repeatedly to the velvet curtain, as if some unseen force tugs me toward it with invisible hands. urging me to cross the threshold again and again, to sit once more on the throne and accept the dark truths it holds. Each time I do, the circle of stone around me grows tighter, the whispers louder, and the presence behind me more insistent. A cold breath on my neck, a voice that speaks in riddles and curses, promising power and pain intertwined. I've stopped fighting. The resistance feels futile, like trying to hold back the tide with bare hands. My mind fractures further each day. Sometimes I catch myself speaking in tongues I don't understand, words that twist and curl around my tongue, like serpents, speaking names and places I've never heard of in waking life. My dreams are invaded by ritualistic dances, by faces painted with blood, by chanting crowds whose eyes gleam with unnatural light, and always the throne waiting, patient, a promise and a threat in equal measure. I am no longer the woman who matched with a man on a dating app. That part of me is buried beneath layers of shadow and smoke, buried beneath a legacy that stretches back far beyond anything I could have imagined. The story I thought was mine to tell has been overwritten by something older, darker, and infinitely more terrifying, a story of devotion and destruction, of love twisted into a blade that cuts away the self to reveal the thing beneath. And now, as the cycle turns and I stand on the edge of the abyss, I realize that the only choice left is to embrace it, to become the bride of Nathaniel, the keeper of secrets, the harbinger of the next chapter in a saga written in blood and madness. Because if I don't, if I try to fight the legacy and the darkness that claims me, I fear I will cease to exist altogether, swallowed by the void that waits patiently beneath the surface, waiting to reclaim what is owed. The velvet curtain waits, the throne waits, and somewhere out there in the endless night, someone is waiting for the next match, the next story, the next soul to be bound in this eternal, horrible dance. And when that moment comes, I will be waiting too, not as a victim, but as a queen, crowned in shadow, a ghost of the past and a promise of the future, forever bound to Nathaniel and the dark that never dies. The night I stopped fighting for my sanity was the night I finally understood the truth, that I never stood a chance, that this was never about escape or survival, but about becoming something else entirely. The motel is no longer a place. It is a living, breathing prison and altar woven into the very fabric of my soul. The velvet curtain has disappeared, replaced by a mirror that stretches from floor to ceiling, cracked but whole, reflecting a version of me that is both familiar and utterly alien. My reflection smiles back at me with hollow eyes, lips curled in a grin that promises both salvation and damnation. I feel the throne inside me now, a weight pressing down on my chest, binding me in chains forged from whispered names and blood's promises. At times I catch glimpses of Tyler's face blending with mine in the mirror, a merging of hunter and hunted, past and present, victim and executioner. The voices that once whispered in the walls have become a chorus, chanting my name alongside Nathaniel's, weaving a symphony of madness that drowns out all reason. I found the last photograph buried beneath the mattress today, a Polaroid of me standing in the rain outside a house I no longer recognize, hand in hand with a shadowy figure whose face is blurred, but whose presence fills me with a terror that is almost comfort. Written on the back, a single chilling sentence: now you belong. There is no more running, no more hiding. I have become the bride, the heir, the new vessel for a darkness that has haunted generations. And as dawn breaks over the motel, the sun fails to touch this place, leaving me in a twilight that feels eternal. The door creaks open, and I know, without seeing, that the next one is here. Another soul wandering into the web, another story ready to be rewritten in blood and shadow. I rise from the bed, my body no longer my own, my voice no longer my own, and I step into the hallway with a smile that is both a promise and a curse, because the cycle is unbroken, the darkness is endless, and I am its queen now, bound forever. To Nathaniel, the fugitive cop killer, the ghost who never dies, and the endless nightmare that no one can escape, the end is only the beginning. Story 2. It all started when I was cleaning out my childhood home after my dad passed away unexpectedly last year. The house was frozen in time, like a museum of my past, dusty shelves filled with old trophies, faded photographs in crooked frames, and boxes of forgotten memories piled in every corner. While rummaging through the attic, behind a loose panel in the wall, I found a small metal box, locked tight and covered in decades of grime. Inside were several journals, his journals, and yellowed with age, bound in cracked leather and secured with a frayed leather strap. I had no idea he kept them. I wasn't sure if I should even open them, but curiosity clawed at me like a living thing. The handwriting was tight, precise, almost mechanical. At first, the entries seemed mundane notes about work, family, every day. Life, but as I flipped through the pages, the tone shifted. The dates on the entries took me back to the late 1980s and early 1990s, and suddenly I was staring at accounts of secret meetings, whispered names, and unexplained absences. The handwriting grew darker, almost frantic. Then I found the first, direct mention of a name that sent a chill down my spine, Mark Lyle. The name rang a faint bell, but it wasn't until I dug deeper that I remembered Mark Lyle was a man convicted of murder in our town. Decades ago, a case that had gone cold and was surrounded by whispers of a miscarriage of justice. The journal entries revealed a connection my father never spoke of, one that tied him not just to Mark Lyle, but to the victim, a local woman named Emily Rhodes, whose death was ruled a tragic accident until the trial painted it as cold-blooded murder. The more I read, the more I realized that my father had been tangled in something far darker than I could have imagined. His words hinted at involvement, not just knowledge, but complicity in something that had been hidden beneath layers of lies, fear, and silence. He wrote about late-night phone calls, shadowed meetings in abandoned warehouses, and threats whispered over cracked landlines. There were mentions of a man named Darren, who seemed to hold the key to the truth, but was too terrified to come forward. The last few entries were smudged, hurried, almost like he was writing while running, and ended abruptly with a cryptic line, "If anyone finds this, they must know the truth. Millie's death was not Mark's doing. The real killer walks free." I felt my hands shake as I closed the journal. Was my father confessing to a cover-up, to murder itself? I didn't know what to believe, but something deep inside me told me I had to find out. I needed to uncover the truth, not just for Emily or Mark, but for my family's name, for my own sanity. Little did I know, opening those journals would unravel everything I thought I knew about my father, my town, and the secrets buried in the shadows. Secrets some people would kill to keep hidden. After days of pacing the creaky floors of that old house, the journals spread out before me like fragments of a puzzle I never wanted to solve. I decided to dig deeper. I started with the local library, hunting down old newspaper clippings, court records, and police reports about Emily Rhodes and Mark Lyle. The town's archives smelled of mold and old paper, and the brittle pages I handled were yellowed like the journals themselves. Emily was described as a quiet woman who kept mostly to herself, a waitress at the diner on Main Street, known for her smile but not much else. Mark Lyle was the opposite, a known troublemaker with a violent past, someone the townsfolk had always eyed with suspicion long before he was arrested for Emily's death. The official story was that Mark killed Emily during a botched robbery attempt. But from the way the town whispered, there was more to it, something no one was brave enough to say out loud. I found Mark's trial transcripts tucked away in a drawer, the kind of cold, clinical language that masked everything except the brutal undercurrent. The prosecution painted a picture of a violent man with no remorse, while the defense tried desperately to poke holes in the evidence that looked like it was stitched together from rumors and pressure. Reading through it, one thing stood out: lack of any forensic evidence directly tying Mark to the crime scene. No murder weapon, no eyewitnesses who could place him at the scene, only circumstantial evidence and a confession that many believed had been coerced. The case had always smelled rotten to me, but the journals confirmed it was worse than I thought. My father's entries mentioned being forced to lie to protect someone powerful, someone who had the town's law enforcement wrapped around his finger. That name was never written explicitly, but the hints were heavy. There were references to bribes, threats, and late-night meetings with people who preferred the truth buried forever. One journal detailed a meeting in a rundown bar where my father was handed an envelope thick with cash in exchange for silence. He wrote about the sinking feeling of guilt that followed him everywhere after that, about sleepless nights filled with nightmares of Emily's face and Mark's pleading eyes. But what shocked me most was a series of entries from the months after the murder that chronicled my father's obsession with uncovering the real killer. He mentioned finding strange symbols carved into the trees near where Emily's body was, found references to cryptic letters sent anonymously to his workplace, and shadowy figures watching him from the edges of his vision. It was as if the deeper he dug, the more dangerous the secret became. Then there was the final entry, written in a near frenzy. They know I'm close. Darren has gone silent. If I disappear, someone must find this and finish what I started. My hands trembled as I realized my father had been living a double life fueled by fear, secrets, and a desperate need to make things right. That realization shook me to my core, because it meant the person responsible for Emily's death was not only still free, but had been manipulating the system for decades. And whoever it was, they hadn't forgotten my father's betrayal. I knew then that the journals were more than memories. They were a call to action, a warning, and a confession all at once. My father's ghosts weren't resting, and neither was the truth. But the deeper I went, the more I understood that exposing the truth could destroy everything I had left. The town that raised me, the family I thought I knew, and maybe even me. There was something suffocating about this knowledge, a weight, that pressed down on my chest whenever I thought about what I might find next. And yet, the journals were a map through the darkness if I followed it. I might finally uncover who really killed Emily Rhodes and why my father's name had to be buried alongside the lies. I had no choice. This was my legacy now, whether I wanted it or not. After weeks spent drowning in the faded ink of those journals and the yellowing newspaper clippings, I realized I couldn't do this alone. The threads of the story were twisting tighter around my own life, and the shadows lurking at the edges felt almost alive, watching me as I pieced together the fragments. I reached out to Darren, the man my dad mentioned as the key to the truth, the one who had gone silent years ago. Tracking him down wasn't easy. The town had changed. People moved away, names vanished from the phone book, and Darren's trail had gone cold long before my father's journals started telling their story. But through a series of old acquaintances, whispered rumors, and some late-night digging on social media, I finally found a name, a face: Darren Hawkins, living off the grid in a remote cabin miles outside of town. I called the number one found, half expecting it to be disconnected, but an older man answered with a voice roughened by years of silence and regret. I told him who I was, what I had found, and how desperate I was to understand what had really happened to Emily Rhodes. After a long pause, he agreed to meet me, but only under the condition that I came alone and that I didn't tell anyone else about our conversation. When I arrived at the cabin, the air was thick with the scent of pine and something darker: damp earth, decay, and old smoke. Darren was older than I expected, his face weathered and lined like a map of pain and secrets. His eyes held a haunted look, the kind that speaks of things seen but never spoken aloud. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Your father was a good man," he said quietly, "but he got in too deep. They don't let people walk away from this kind of thing." I asked him to tell me everything: who they were, what really happened that night, and why my father had to lie. Darren's story spilled out in pieces, fragmented and raw, like a confession whispered to the wind. He told me about the night Emily died, a night that had been planned to look like a robbery gone wrong, but was anything but accidental. Emily had stumbled onto something she shouldn't have, something tied to the town's most powerful men, people who kept their hands clean publicly, but dealt in blood and fear behind closed doors. My father, Darren said, had been roped in early on, threatened, bribed, and trapped in a web of lies and silence. He wasn't the killer, but he'd been forced to cover for someone who was. The real murderer was someone above the law, someone whose name was whispered only in the darkest corners. Darren's voice cracked as he described how my father tried to fight back, how he collected evidence, tried to warn others, even reached out to the wrong people and paid the price with his peace of mind. The journals, Darren said, were my father's last attempt to expose the truth before he was swallowed by fear and exhaustion. But it didn't end there. Darren warned me that the people involved still had eyes everywhere, and anyone digging too deep risked becoming the next target. When I pressed for names, Darren's gaze darkened, and he whispered one name that sent a cold shiver down my spine. It was a name I recognized, a man still respected, even revered in our town, someone no one would dare accuse. The implication was clear: justice had never been served, and the real killer had not only escaped punishment, but had embedded himself into the very fabric of the town's power. I left Darren's cabin with more questions than answers, and a deep sense of dread settling in my bones. That night I found a note slipped under my door at home. No signature. Just 2 words written in hurried, jagged script. Stop looking. My hands trembled as I read them, but my resolve hardened. I couldn't turn back. Not now. Not after everything I'd uncovered. I spent the following days retracing my father's steps, visiting the abandoned warehouses, the rundown diner where Emily worked, even the wooded areas where the journals described strange symbols carved into tree trunks. The deeper I went, the more I felt watched. Shadows flickered in my peripheral vision. Strangers lingered just beyond sight. Phone calls with silence on the other end. I began to understand my father's paranoia wasn't madness. It was real. One night, as a storm raged outside, I found myself standing by the old oak tree near the creek, the one my father had mentioned as a site of secret meetings. There, carved into the bark, were symbols identical to those in his journal's circles, interlaced with jagged lines that seemed to pulse under the rain-soaked surface. I traced the carvings with my fingers, and as thunder rolled across the sky, I heard footsteps crunching in the wet leaves behind me. I spun around, but no one was there, only the whisper of wind and the oppressive weight of unseen eyes. That night, the nightmares began. Faces without names stared at me from the darkness. Voices begged and threatened in the same breath. And every morning I awoke with the lingering taste of ash in my mouth, and the feeling that I was no longer alone, that something from those woods had followed me home. The journals had pulled me into a darkness deeper and more dangerous than I'd ever imagined, and with each step forward I feared I was walking the same path that had swallowed my father whole. The following weeks were a blur of sleepless nights and jittery days. Each moment waited with the growing certainty that the past wasn't just a memory, it was alive, watching me clawing at the edges of my reality like a beast waiting to be fed. I started keeping a journal of my own, desperate to hold on to sanity, to track the strange occurrences that grew more frequent with every passing day. The notes my father left weren't just words. They were warnings, warnings I had ignored at my own peril. People I once trusted began to act strangely. Friends I'd known since childhood became distant, their eyes darting nervously when I brought up Emily or my father's journals. I was followed, not overtly, but the subtlety was terrifying. A car parked across the street every time I left. The house, a shadow slipping behind me in a crowded store. Phone calls that ended the moment I answered. One evening, I received a package with no return address, leather-bound notebook. Older and more worn than the ones I had found, filled with pages of cryptic notes and newspaper clippings I hadn't seen before. Inside was a folded photograph of Emily Rhodes, smiling in sunlight, her eyes hauntingly familiar. Scribbled on the back was a chilling message. They lied, we lied, but the truth bleeds. It was unsigned, but I knew somehow was meant to have it. The town's veneer of normalcy was cracking. At the diner where Emily worked, the owner whispered about things best left alone, his eyes flickering to the doorway as if expecting someone to burst in and silence us both. At the local bar, old men muttered about a curse, about deals made in the shadows and blood spilled to keep those deals secret. I found myself drawn back to Darren's warnings. They have eyes everywhere, he'd said. Trust no one. The phrase became my mantra as paranoia crept into every corner of my mind. One night, desperate for answers, I broke into the police archives, sneaking past creaky floorboards and sleeping guards to find the original case files on Emily's murder. The documents were heavily redacted, as if someone had deliberately erased the truth, but hidden in the margins were notes in my father's handwriting, frantic, desperate, detailing inconsistencies in the investigation, names of officers who had been bribed or threatened, and cryptic references to the council. I pieced together what I could: a secretive group of influential men in the town, wielding power behind closed doors and responsible for burying the real crime to protect their own. As I dug, the threats escalated. My car was vandalized, smashed, tires slashed, an unmistakable message. One night, while reviewing the journals, I heard a knock at the door. No one was there when I opened it, but on the doorstep lay a single item, a bloodied glove, soaked and dripping, a horrifying token that I was dangerously close to the truth. My hands trembled as I picked it up, realizing that someone was watching, someone who wanted me to stop, but I couldn't. I had to know. I began connecting with people who had been silenced over the years, family members of other victims, former officers who had fled the town, whistleblowers hidden in plain sight. Each story painted the same picture: a tangled web of corruption, murder, and fear that stretched back decades, with my father caught in the center, both a victim and a participant. The nights grew colder, darker. My dreams were invaded by Emily's face, pale and sorrowful, her eyes pleading for justice. I woke screaming, drenched in sweat, only to find scratches on my arms I didn't remember getting, like claws had torn through my skin. The line between nightmare and reality blurred, until I wasn't sure which was which. One evening, a stranger appeared at my door, a woman with eyes like storm clouds and a voice trembling with urgency. She handed me a crumpled envelope filled with letters my father had hidden away, letters that detailed meetings with people whose names sent chills down my spine. She warned me that those same people had noticed my digging and were closing in. That night, I realized that uncovering my father's past wasn't just about justice. Anymore was about survival. The truth I sought was a living thing, hungry and ruthless, and it would consume anyone who dared to pull back the veil. I was trapped in a nightmare where every shadow could hide a threat, and every whisper could be a warning or a death sentence. The journals had opened a door to a darkness I might never close, and the price of knowing was higher than I ever imagined. The days blurred into nights as a suffocating paranoia settled over me like a second skin, thick and relentless, suffocating every flicker of hope and reason. I found myself jumping at shadows, flinching at every unexpected sound, and scanning every crowd for faces that might belong to those who wanted me silenced, those who wanted the past buried again forever. I stopped answering my phone, except for calls from numbers I recognized. But even then, there was an unshakable dread lurking beneath every ring, as if the line itself was a tether to something sinister waiting on the other end. The envelopes kept coming, sometimes slipped under my door, other times left in the mailbox when I wasn't looking, each one containing more pieces of a puzzle that was rapidly turning into a labyrinth of lies, betrayals, and death threats disguised as warnings. The words inside were more urgent now. Stop digging, walk away while you still can. And sometimes chillingly simple, "You're next." My father's journals had become both a lifeline and a noose. Tightening around my neck, I began to question everything I thought I knew about him. The man who taught me to ride a bike, who attended every school play, who smiled gently on family photos, now stained with the weight of his secrets. Had he been the man who helped orchestrate a murder? Had he been an accomplice or a victim? Or worse, had he been both? One night, unable to bear the silence, I played the old voice recorder I found tucked in the back of one journal. The tape crackled, filled with my father's voice-whispered confessions and frantic ramblings about the council. Emily's silence and the price of truth. His voice trembled as he described a final meeting, a confrontation, in a forgotten part of town where shadows ruled and deals were made in blood. As the tape ended, I felt an icy hand gripped my heart, and the hairs on my neck stood up as if invisible eyes were watching me. Around the same time, my computer was hacked. Files were deleted, emails disappeared, and every digital footprint I had painstakingly gathered vanished into thin air. I realized I wasn't just dealing with ghosts from the past, was tangled in a living nightmare where power, corruption, and fear intersected in the darkest corners of the town. A few brave souls I contacted vanished without a trace, their phone numbers disconnected, their homes abandoned. One old friend who had promised to help showed up at my door one stormy night, eyes wild and desperate, warning me that they were coming for me too. The weight of his fear was almost unbearable, and days later he was gone, disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only a hastily scribbled note: "Run." I wanted to run, but I couldn't not anymore. Somewhere deep inside, a flicker of defiance burned against the encroaching darkness. The last journal I uncovered was different. It was not my father's, but belonged to Emily herself. Its pages were soaked with tears and fear, a desperate chronicle of a woman trapped in a web of secrets and lies, trying to expose a truth that had cost her life. Reading Emily's words, I felt her presence, a haunting reminder that she deserved justice beyond the courtroom's failure. The diary spoke of names I had only glimpsed before, of meetings and threats, and most terrifyingly, of a date when she planned to reveal everything she knew, a date that matched the night she was found dead. Piecing it all together, I saw the cold, cruel mechanics of a cover-up, a powerful network protecting one of its own at any cost. My father, tangled in this web, had tried to break free, but was swallowed by guilt and fear. I was left with a choice that no one should ever face: pursue the truth and risk becoming the next victim, or bury the past forever and live with the knowledge that justice had been stolen. But I knew I couldn't walk away, not when the blood of the past still stained the present, and not when the silence had become louder than any scream. The deeper I dug, the more I felt like I was being swallowed by shadows that stretched far beyond the dusty pages of my father's journals or the faded crime scene photographs I studied by candlelight. This was no longer just a murder mystery. It was a suffocating maze of lies, corruption, and betrayal that seemed to pulse with a malevolent life of its own, consuming everything in its path, including me. Every lead I followed turned to ash in my hands. Every witness I tried to talk to either clammed up or vanished without a trace, as if the town itself was conspiring to keep the truth locked away behind a fortress of fear. Old friends became strangers overnight, Phone calls went unanswered, and when I passed by familiar places, I felt eyes burning into my back, silent threats hanging in the air like smoke from a long-extinguished fire. I started carrying a small recorder with me, desperate to capture the whispered confessions and half-truths I managed to coax from nervous locals in darkened bars and back alleys. What I learned was staggering. A tightly knit group of influential men, some of whom still held positions of power, had woven an unbreakable web to shield the true killer. A man whose face was well known in town, but whose sins had been carefully erased from the public record. This man, it seemed, was more than just a criminal. He was the puppeteer pulling strings from the shadows, orchestrating silence with threats, bribes, and brutal violence. The more I uncovered, the more my own life seemed to unravel. One night, as rain pelted the windows of my small apartment, I found a note slipped beneath the door, soaked and trembling in the cold draft. It read simply, "Stop, or she be next." My heart dropped. She, Emily, or someone else. The threat was clear, but who was the sender? Panic clashed with determination inside me, and I knew backing down was no longer an option. I reached out to the only person left I trusted, a retired detective named Carl, someone who had worked the Emily Rhodes case but was forced out under mysterious circumstances. Meeting him in a dimly lit diner, I felt the weight of years and secrets in his tired eyes. Carl spoke in hushed tones about corruption that ran deeper than anyone wanted to admit, about evidence that had been shredded and witnesses that disappeared before they could talk. He gave me a faded photograph, a snapshot of my father standing beside a man I recognized from the journals, a man who'd vanished after the murder and was rumored to have died, abroad but whose shadow still haunted the town's streets. Carl's voice trembled when he said, "Your father tried to break free, but the cost was high. He paid in silence and fear." That night, my apartment was broken into. Nothing was stolen, but the message was clear. I was being watched, hunted even. The intruder left behind a single playing card, the ace of spades, stained with something dark and sticky. My blood ran cold. Sleep became a distant memory, replaced by nightmares where Emily's eyes followed me, pleading silently as I ran through. Endless corridors lined with my father's journals and blood-stained pages that whispered of betrayal. I was losing myself, becoming consumed by the story, the hunt for truth turning into a terrifying obsession. Then came the day I found the hidden compartment in my father's desk, a small, secret drawer I had overlooked before, inside, wrapped in oilskin, was a stack of letters, coded messages between my father and Darren, and a hand-drawn map marking locations I had never heard of. At the bottom, a note in my father's handwriting, "For the one who finds this, follow the map, find the truth. But beware the darkness that waits." Following that map led me to a decrepit cabin on the outskirts of town, surrounded by dead trees and silence so thick it pressed against my skin. Inside, I discovered evidence that could shatter the town's carefully maintained lies. A box filled with old photographs, documents, and a blood-stained knife. Rusted, but unmistakably the murder weapon. I realized then that I was standing on the edge of a precipice. The truth was so close I could taste its bitterness, but uncovering it could cost me everything. The lines between justice and vengeance blurred, and I had to decide whether I was brave enough to cross that line, or whether I would become just another name erased from the town's history. Swallowed by the darkness my father had tried to fight all those years ago. The following days were a nightmare etched in reality's coldest shadows. Every moment was soaked in an oppressive dread that wrapped round my chest like iron bands, squeezing tighter with each heartbeat as I felt the invisible noose of the town's dark secret tightening round my neck. I barely ate, barely slept, haunted by visions that flickered behind my eyelids, even in broad daylight faces from the past twisted in silent screams. Voices whispering lies and truths I couldn't decipher, and worst of all, the overwhelming sense that I was no longer alone, that something had crossed the threshold into my life and would not be turned away. I installed cameras around my house, but the footage was corrupted or inexplicably erased, as if the darkness itself had found a way to reach through the technology meant to protect me. I stopped answering my phone altogether. Calls from blocked numbers left me with a cold sense of foreboding so profound it settled in my bones. One night, in a fit of desperation, I drove to the cemetery where Emily Rhodes was buried, seeking some kind of connection, some grounding in the face of the madness closing in. The rain was relentless, washing the earth in sheets of cold silver, and when I reached her grave, I found fresh footprints leading up to the headstone, disturbed soil where no one should have walked, and a single blood-red rose laid carefully. Atop the stone, I couldn't breathe. It was a message, a warning, or a promise, I wasn't sure which. Then, as I turned to leave, a whisper brushed my ear like a breath of wind. Stop now, or join her. I spun around, heart hammering, but no one was there. The air was thick with silence, broken only by the distant rumble of thunder and the patter of rain. From that moment, the nightmares intensified visions of my father, broken and terrified, his eyes begging me to turn back, to let the past lie buried. But I couldn't, not when the truth had already seeped into my blood. I began to notice subtle changes in myself, a constant unease that twisted into paranoia, moments of blackouts, where hours vanished, and the overwhelming urge to write, to record, to expose everything no matter the cost. My reflection in the mirror grew stranger, eyes darker, as if I were becoming a vessel for something older, something that had waited for decades to be unleashed. Friends disappeared from my life. Some moved away suddenly, others refused to answer. Calls or texts, and the few who stayed urged me to quit, to leave the past alone. But the past had already claimed me, and the journal's ink had seeped into my soul. One evening I received a visit from a woman I hadn't seen since childhood, her face pale and eyes wide with terror. She handed me a bundle of letters my father had once written to her in secret, letters I'd never known existed. Her voice trembled as she explained that my father had tried to protect her and her family from the wrath of the council, that secretive group whose members wielded power like a noose around the town's neck. She begged me to stop, warning that those men didn't just kill for cover-ups, they destroyed lives, families, and futures. But it was too late. The darkness had found me, and I was already lost in its embrace. The final straw came when I discovered a hidden compartment in my father's old desk, containing a small, ornate box etched with symbols that matched the carvings from the woods where Emily's body was found. Inside, I found a pendant stained with dried blood and a note that chilled me to the core. The curse is real. It follows the bloodline. You cannot escape it. I understood then that the murder, the cover-up, the silence, they were part of something far older, something that transcended human cruelty and touched the realm of the supernatural. I was no longer just chasing a murderer or corrupt Mene, was battling a legacy of darkness that had been passed down like a shadowy heirloom, waiting for the next generation to claim its toll. The journals had been a warning, a plea, and a curse all wrapped into one, and now the truth was mine to bear, no matter how deep it sank its claws into my soul. I started to feel like a shadow myself, drifting through the remnants of a life I barely recognized, consumed by the labyrinth of secrets my father had left behind and the darkness that clung to every word. I read in those old journals the weight of the blood-stained pendant pressed against my chest like a physical reminder that I was tied to this horror in a way I couldn't escape. I began tracing the origins of the symbols, the curse my father had written about, and what I uncovered terrified me beyond reason. There were whispers of an ancient pact made by the town's founding fathers, a secret society that had bound their souls and futures to a force older and more malevolent than any earthly crime. Emily's death was not just a cover-up of a murder, it was part of a ritual, a sacrifice designed to keep the town's darkest powers appeased and their power unchallenged. Each journal entry, each letter, each cryptic symbol suddenly fit into a pattern that was as much supernatural as it was human cruelty. I realized with sinking horror that the council my father feared was more than just corrupt Menet, was the mortal face of something eternal, an unholy alliance that fed on silence and fear. But what terrified me most was that my bloodline was part of the bargain. The pendant was not just a relic, it was a chain linking me to the past sins and the inescapable future. The deeper I went, the more I saw how my father had tried to fight it, to resist being swallowed whole, but the cost was too high. He'd lived under the weight of a secret so dark it had consumed him piece by piece, driving him to madness and silence, and now it was my turn. The nightmares became unbearable, blurring the line between sleep and waking, between the living and the dead. I heard Emily's voice calling me through the static of my phone, saw her eyes in the flickering shadows, felt her cold hand on my shoulder when I was alone. I was haunted by visions of my father's final days, a man broken by guilt, clutching his journals like a talisman against the dark. Then came the night when everything broke. I was alone in the house when the power went out, plunging me into a darkness so complete I felt it seep inside me. The air grew thick and cold, and from the shadows emerged shapes that twisted and writhed, their voices a chorus of whispered lies and screams. I realized then that I was not just confronting a crime, but a curse, a living nightmare passed down through generations, and the choice was mine, succumb or fight. I grabbed the pendant, clutching it tight as the darkness closed in, and vowed to expose the truth no matter the cost. The battle ahead would be unlike anything I had ever imagined, but I was ready to face the shadows, to break the cycle, and to finally bring justice to Emily Rhodes, my father, and everyone who had been silenced. This story was far from over, but I had found my purpose and I would not stop until the curse was broken. The final confrontation came on a storm-soaked night when the sky ripped open with lightning, as if the heavens themselves were trying to tear through the darkness that had held my family and town captive for decades, armed only with my father's journals, the blood-stained pendant, and a determination forged from fear and love. I returned to the woods where Emily's body had been found, to the place where it had all begun. The trees seemed to close in around me, their twisted limbs like gnarled fingers reaching out to snatch me away. But I pressed forward, every step echoing with the ghosts of the past, as I reached the ancient oak, the one marked with the cryptic symbols. I found a circle carved deep into the earth, the remnants of a ritual long forgotten but never truly gone. The wind whispered through the branches, carrying voices that begged for release and warned of vengeance. Then, emerging from the shadows, were the men, the real killers, the council members who had hidden behind power and silence for too long. Their faces were masks of calm, but their eyes burned with desperation, knowing that the truth was finally within reach. I confronted them, reading aloud the damning passages from my father's journals, revealing the sacrifices, the lies, and the blood debts they had accrued. They tried to silence me, threats spilling from their lips like poison, but the pendant pulsed with a strange energy, as if awakening after decades of slumber. And I felt a power rise inside me, my father's courage, my own will, the weight of the innocent who had been lost. The confrontation spiraled into chaos, but something shifted in the night. The ground trembled, the air grew electric, and the shadows that had once protected the corrupt began to unravel. One by one, the men's facades cracked their secrets. Exposed to the cold light of dawn, the curse, the pact, the years of bloodshed, it all started to break apart like shattered glass. I stood alone at the center of that clearing as the first rays of sunlight pierced the gloom, feeling the heavy burden lift from my shoulders. Emily's eyes, once so full of sorrow, now seemed to shine with a quiet peace, and I knew that the truth had finally been set free. My father's name was cleared, and though the scars of the past would never fully heal, justice had been served not by a court, but by the courage to face darkness head-on. As I walked away from the woods that morning, I felt the shadows recede, the whispers fade, and the heavy silence replaced by a fragile hope. The journals were no longer a curse, but a testament, a story of darkness conquered by light, of a family's secret finally brought into the sun. And though the night still holds its shadows, I now carry the truth with me, unafraid, ready to face whatever comes next. Story 3. When I first found the Airbnb listing, it seemed perfect, secluded, affordable, and tucked away in a small town I'd never visited before. Far from the chaos of the city and my own life's stresses, the photos showed a quaint, old farmhouse surrounded by thick woods, with a porch that creaked gently in the breeze, and a cozy, warmly lit interior. The host, an older man named Harold, was polite but somewhat reserved in our messages, answering questions curtly but kindly, enough to avoid suspicion. I arrived late in the afternoon, the sun low and golden, as I pulled up the graveled driveway, my phone almost dead, and the last bus long gone. Harold greeted me at the door with a stiff smile, his eyes a strange shade of grey that seemed to flicker. Whenever I caught his gaze too long, the house smelled faintly of damp wood and something else, something faintly metallic, but I shrugged it off, attributing it to old pipes or a leaky roof. The room he showed me was small but neat, with a single bed, a window that looked out over the darkening forest, and a door down the hall that was locked tight, the one door he always told me never to enter. "That's my private room," he said once, his voice low and final. "You won't need to go in there." At first, I didn't think much of it. People have private spaces, right? But the unease started the first night when I heard muffled noises behind that door, soft shuffling, occasional whispers, and sometimes a low groan that sent chills down my spine. I called Harold out, but he only chuckled nervously, saying it was probably the old pipes or the wind. Still, the air around that locked door felt heavy, oppressive, like it held a secret that didn't want to be uncovered. Over the next few days, I tried to leave. Every time I packed my bag and stepped outside, Harold appeared at the door, blocking my way with a smile that no longer felt friendly. "You're welcome to stay as long as you want," he said smoothly, but I could see something darker lurking in his eyes. "It's not safe out there tonight." The phone signal was weak, and my calls to friends went unanswered, as if the house was isolated, not just physically, but in every way that mattered. Panic started creeping in when the food deliveries stopped arriving, and the few times I tried to walk into town. The forest seemed to shift, the paths twisting back toward the house like a maze designed to trap me. I was stuck, and the feeling of being watched pressed down on me constantly. The locked door became an obsession. I had to know what Harold was hiding. What was behind that barrier that seemed to pulse with malevolence? One night, as thunder crashed outside and rain hammered against the windows, I finally found the courage to pick the lock. My hands shook violently as I slipped inside the forbidden room, the air immediately colder and thick with the stench of decay and something metallic, like dried blood. The dim light revealed walls covered in disturbing drawings, twisted faces, cryptic symbols, and maps of the forest marked with strange, ominous signs. In the center of the room was a makeshift altar stained with dark, crusted patches that looked horrifyingly like old blood. There were jars filled with unidentifiable objects suspended in murky liquid, and photographs pinned up around the room, photos of people, faces frozen in terror, some scratched out violently. Then I saw it, a diary, worn and stained, its pages filled with confessions and chilling accounts of Harold's true nature. He was no mere host. He was a predator, a man who hunted and captured travelers like me, trapping them in this remote nightmare. The final entries described rituals, sacrifices, and a twisted obsession with keeping his victims close, never letting them leave. My blood ran cold as footsteps echoed outside the door, slow and deliberate. Harold was coming. I grabbed the diary and bolted, heart pounding as the house seemed to close in around me, trapping me in a nightmare I might never escape. I sprinted down the hall, the diary clutched tightly to my chest as Harold's heavy footsteps thundered behind me, growing louder, closer, like the Grim Reaper himself was chasing me through the shadows of that cursed house. My breath came in ragged gasps, heart hammering like a war drum as I pounded against the door, desperate to escape. But the front door was locked, bolted from the outside. Just like the private room, and the windows were barred with thick metal, grills that turned the house into a prison. Panic surged as I realized I was trapped. The house groaned and creaked around me, the storm outside beating down like the fury of some ancient god. The wind howled through the cracks in the walls, carrying with it the faintest whispers, faint voices begging, pleading for release or perhaps warning me to run while I still could. I turned back toward the locked room, knowing I had nowhere else to go, and prepared myself for whatever waited on the other side of that door. I forced the lock open again, the mechanism grinding with resistance like a beast reluctant to reveal its secrets. Inside, the air was thicker, suffocating, filled with a cold so deep it seeped into my bones. The altar was even more disturbing. Under the flicker of my flashlight fresh, candles burned low, their wax dripping onto ancient symbols carved into the wooden floor. The jars along the walls now seemed to move. Or maybe it was my mind playing tricks, the shadows dancing in a grotesque ballet. Suddenly, a low chant filled the room, guttural and ancient, as if the house itself was alive, speaking in tongues older than time. I backed away slowly, but the door slammed shut behind me, plunging me into darkness so complete it swallowed every flicker of hope. I fumbled desperately for the diary, but it was gone, vanished, as if swallowed by the walls themselves. Then came the whisper again, this time clear and close, right behind me. You can't leave, frozen in terror. I felt a cold breath on my neck and turned slowly to see Harold standing there, his eyes glowing faintly in the darkness, a twisted smile curling his lips. His voice was calm, almost amused. The house doesn't like visitors who ask too many questions. He stepped forward, and I stumbled back, tripping over a loose floorboard and falling hard. Pain shot through my leg, but fear pushed me up. Again, I ran blindly, searching for any escape, any crack in the suffocating nightmare. That night, I learned that Harold was more than a man. He was a guardian of horrors, a prisoner and captor bound to this ancient evil that hungered for souls. I tried to scream, but my voice was swallowed by the oppressive silence that followed. Him like a shadow, the hours stretched into eternity, filled with a maddening mix of terror and despair, until at dawn I was found by the local sheriff, wandering the woods like a ghost, my clothes torn and my mind shattered. I never spoke of what happened inside that house, not because I wanted to forget, but because some horrors are too deep, too dark to share. The house remained standing, waiting for the next traveler, the next soul foolish enough to knock on its door and never leave. Even after I escaped that nightmare, the darkness followed me like a second skin. Every shadow in my apartment seemed to stretch longer. Every creak in the night became a sinister whisper, and I felt Harold's eyes on me, watching, waiting, as if the house had never truly let me go. I couldn't sleep. My dreams were invaded by that cursed Roomba altar. The jars, the faces in the photos, twisted in agony and fear, their silent screams echoing in my mind. The diary haunted me most of all, the pages filled with clues and confessions that seemed to bleed into reality, as if the ink was alive, crawling beneath my skin. The police dismissed my story as trauma-induced delusion, but I knew the truth was far worse. I tried to contact past guests of the Airbnb, but none existed, at least none willing to talk, as if the house erased their memories or worse. My phone would ring with dead air, and I'd hear faint chanting on the line, the same guttural voices from the locked room, promising that the house was never done with me. Slowly, my world shrank, consumed by paranoia and fear. Friends stopped returning my calls, worried I was losing myself, and I could no longer tell where reality ended and nightmare began. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Harold's smile, saw the locked door, felt the cold breath on my neck, heard the chant growing louder, pulling me back toward that place of horrors. I became obsessed with finding a way to break the curse, to sever the evil tether binding me to that house, but every ritual I tried failed. Every symbol I studied seemed to deepen the darkness. And then, one night, as I lay in bed, exhausted and broken, a message appeared on my phone screen. No number, just words. You can't run. You belong to the house now. The walls seemed to close in, the shadows thickening until I was trapped. Once more, a prisoner of the nightmare, I thought I'd escaped. The house was patient, it knew I'd return. And I would, because some horrors are not just places. They are curses, and some souls are never truly free. The weeks that followed my escape from that cursed house were a waking nightmare that bled into every part of my life, a suffocating fog of dread that clung to me like a second skin and refused to let go, no matter how far I ran or how desperately I tried to forget. The house, Harold's presence, the locked room, all of it had burrowed into my mind, carving out spaces of fear and obsession that grew darker with every passing day. Sleep was a stranger. Every time I closed my eyes, I was dragged back to that room filled with jars of twisted things floating in murky liquid, to the altar stained with old blood, to the faces pinned on the walls, some smiling, some screaming, all trapped in eternal torment. I could still feel the cold breath on my neck, the whisper that chilled my soul. You can't leave. I tried to drown it out with work, with friends, with anything that might anchor me back to reality. But the house's shadow stretched far beyond its physical walls, seeping into my every thought, my every breath. Friends and family noticed my withdrawal, my haunted eyes and jittery hands, and some tried to reach out. But the more I tried to explain, the more I was met with disbelief or pity. The police dismissed my story as the ravings of someone traumatized, and social media was no refuge. My posts about the experience were met with skepticism or outright mockery. Desperation drove me to research everything I could find about the house, the area, and Harold himself. But the deeper I dug, the more I realized how carefully the truth had been buried. The town records were incomplete. Past owners of the property were shrouded in mystery, their histories erased or rewritten. Local legends spoke of disappearances, whispered stories of travelers who never left, but these were dismissed as old wives' tales until I found an underground forum where people shared similar experiences. They called it the house that waits, a place rumored to trap souls and feed on fear. I connected with a few who had escaped, their messages filled with warnings and fragmented accounts that mirrored my own nightmare. One told me about a ritual to break the curse, but it required confronting the house once more, entering the locked room and facing the darkness that dwelled there. I knew I should walk away, let the nightmare fade, but the pull was too strong. It was like a siren song calling me back, promising answers and release if I was brave enough to return. My health deteriorated. Anxiety gripped me in crushing waves, and hallucinations began. Phantom footsteps behind me, fleeting glimpses of Harold's gaunt figure in mirrors and windows, the faint scent of damp wood and decay invading my senses, even when I was miles away from that place. Then came the nights when the boundary between dreams and reality blurred completely, when I awoke to find a diary on my nightstand. Pages open to passages I didn't remember reading, the ink seeming to shift and writhe like living shadows. I was losing myself, unraveling thread by thread, caught in a web spun by a darkness older than I could comprehend. And yet, amid the terror, a strange clarity emerged. I understood that the house, Harold, the locked room, were all part of something far more sinister, a malevolent force that transcended human cruelty and embraced something supernatural, a curse that bound victims and perpetrator alike in a twisted dance of death and despair. I wasn't just running from a man or a house. I was battling an ancient evil that had claimed countless souls before me, feeding on their fear and silence, and it wanted me back. One stormy night, the phone rang, no caller ID, no voice, just that same chilling whisper, "Come home." The power flickered, shadows stretched long and sharp against the walls, and I realized that no matter how far I fled, the house was never going to let me go. The time had come to face the nightmare once and for all, to confront Harold, the locked room, and the darkness that waited patiently in the depths. Because some horrors are not just places, they are living, breathing curses that hunt you until you either break free or become part of their eternal prison. The decision to return to that cursed house was the most terrifying and inevitable choice I had ever made, as if some invisible force was pulling me back to the epicenter of my nightmare, to the locked door that had become a symbol of everything I feared and everything I needed to uncover to reclaim my sanity and my life. I packed a bag with only the essentials, the diary, a flashlight, a pocket knife, forced myself to drive through the storm that howled like a living beast, the rain hammering against the windshield as if warning me to turn back before it was too late. Every mile closer tightened the knot of dread in my chest, my hands trembling as I gripped the steering wheel, haunted by memories of Harold's cold, twisted smile and the unbearable weight of the locked room's secrets. When I finally pulled into the driveway, the house loomed like a dark sentinel, windows gleaming like watchful eyes in the heavy rain. The air was thick with the scent of mildew, rot, and something metallic, and as I stepped inside, the floorboards groaned beneath my feet like the slow creak of a coffin lid opening. The house seemed almost alive, breathing in and out with the weight of centuries of secrets and horrors, each room whispering tales of madness and death. I made my way down the hall, every step echoing in the silence, until I reached the locked door, its surface cold and unyielding beneath my fingertips. My breath came in ragged bursts as I pulled out the lockpick set I'd bought in desperation, my hands shaking violently but my resolve unbroken. The tumblers clicked open with a sound that echoed through the empty house like a tolling bell, and I pushed the door wide to reveal the room that had haunted my nightmares. Inside, the air was thick and foul, the faint glow of candles casting twisted shadows on the walls covered in grotesque drawings and cryptic symbols. The altar sat at the center, stained dark with dried blood that seemed to pulse in the flickering light, while jars filled with murky liquid lined the shelves, some containing things I dared not identify, twisted shapes and unrecognizable forms that seemed to writhe in their confinement. I stepped deeper inside, heart pounding as I noticed new additions, fresh flowers laid carefully on the altar, a scattering of old coins, and the unmistakable scent of my own fear hanging thick in the air. Then, As I reached for the diary that lay open on a blood-stained table, a voice echoed from the shadows, low, guttural, and chillingly familiar. "You shouldn't have come back." Harold stepped out of the darkness, eyes glowing with a malevolent light, his smile a grotesque mask of twisted satisfaction. I backed away, tripping over a loose floorboard, and the shadows seemed to close in around me, whispering ancient curses and promises of eternal torment. But I was no longer the terrified guest I'd been. The fear was there, yes, but so was a fierce determination fueled by the knowledge that the house's power thrived on silence and submission. I raised the diary like a shield, reciting the names and stories of those trapped before me, breaking the spell with the power of truth and memory. Harold's expression flickered, his form wavering like smoke caught in a gust of wind, and with a final, enraged roar, the darkness began to unravel. The jars shattered, spilling their grotesque contents onto the floor. The altar cracked and crumbled, and the walls seemed to bleed light, purging the years of darkness. I stumbled out of the room, breathless and shaking, as the first rays of dawn broke through the windows, bathing the house in a cleansing light. The oppressive weight lifted, replaced by a fragile peace I hadn't known in months. Though the scars of that nightmare would never fully fade, I had broken free from the house's curse, at least for now. I left the farmhouse behind, the locked room finally opened, the secret horrors revealed and laid to rest. And as I drove away, I vowed to never forget the price of silence and the strength it took to face the darkness and walk back into the light. The days blurred into nights, and nights into a twisted limbo where I was neither fully awake nor asleep, caught in a suffocating trap woven by fear and a darkness that refused to release its hold on me. Every reflection in every window or mirror seemed to flicker with Harold's pale, ghostly face, eyes gleaming with cold amusement, mocking my attempts to break free from a nightmare that now felt inescapable. I found myself drawn once again toward the woods surrounding that accursed house, compelled by a force beyond reason, like a moth spiraling toward a flame that would burn me to ash. And as I stood on the edge of the forest, the wind whispered promises of release and threats of eternal imprisonment. The trees seemed to breathe, their branches clawing at the sky like skeletal fingers, and the ground beneath my feet pulsed faintly as if the very earth was alive, watching, waiting. Every step forward was a battle against the creeping dread that clawed at my mind, memories flashing unbidden. The altar, the blood, the jars with their unspeakable contents, and Harold's twisted grin just before the darkness swallowed me whole. I clutched the pendant I had taken from the locked room, feeling its cold weight as both a burden and a talisman, the last tether to my fading sanity. The air grew thick with the scent of damp earth and decay, and as I ventured deeper, shadows shifted and whispered, voices rising into a chorus of lost souls trapped in the house's endless nightmare, their cries echoing like a dirge that promised no salvation. At the heart of the forest, beneath the ancient oak, etched with the same cryptic symbols from the locked room, I found the remnants of a circled the ritual site, the place where the curse was born and where it could perhaps be ended. But I was not alone. Emerging from the darkness were figures, gaunt and spectral, their eyes hollow but burning with hatred and despair. Harold stood among them, no longer human, but a twisted wraith bound to the curse. his voice a rasping echo that cut through the night. You cannot undo what was done. The house owns you. I trembled but stepped forward, voice shaking but resolute, reciting the names of the victims, the truth hidden in the pages of the diary, the broken promises of the past. Light burst through the trees in unnatural, searing radiance that pushed back the shadows and forced the spectres to recoil in agony. The earth trembled and the ancient symbols glowed as the curse fought to hold on, screaming in fury and desperation. But I held firm, the pendant burning cold against my skin, and with a final cry, the darkness shattered, the shadows dissolving into the night air like mist at dawn. Exhausted and broken, I collapsed beneath the ancient oak, the forest falling, silent save for the distant song of birds welcoming the first light of day. The curse was broken, or so I hoped. The house no longer haunted my steps. The whispers faded, and a fragile peace settled over the town. But deep in my soul I knew that darkness never truly dies. It only waits for the next soul foolish enough to cross its threshold for the next story waiting to be told in whispers and shadows. And mine was one that would haunt me forever. Even though the sun had finally pierced the endless gloom, and the cursed house no longer held me in its suffocating grip, I quickly realized that the battle I had fought was only the beginning of a far deeper struggle. The shadows of that nightmare had planted seeds of fear and madness inside me that grew with each passing day, twisting my thoughts and poisoning my nights with relentless whispers that clawed at the edges of my sanity like unseen claws scraping bone. I found myself waking in cold sweats, heart pounding as I caught glimpses of Harold's pale, gaunt face in every reflective surface, from the dark screen of my phone to the shards of broken glass, scattered across my floor, and each time the memories flooded back with violent intensity. The locked room, the blood-stained altar, the jars filled with the unholy remnants of his victims, and the ritual circle deep in the forest where light and darkness had clashed in a desperate battle. For my soul, my friends tried to help, but their faces blurred into faceless strangers as I withdrew into a cocoon of paranoia and despair, convinced that the evil I had faced still hunted me through every shadowed corner and every silence between heartbeats. I stopped answering calls, stopped stepping outside after nightfall, and pored over every scrap of information I could find about curses, hauntings, and ancient rituals, desperate to find a way to shield myself from the darkness that I feared would return to claim me again. One night, as the rain pounded against my window and the wind howled like the cries of the damned, my phone lit up with a message from an unknown number. The house remembers. It waits. You cannot hide. The words sent a cold shiver down my spine, and I knew with terrible certainty that the darkness was not finished with me, that the curse had woven itself into my very blood, binding me to its endless cycle of horror and silence. The diary, once a beacon of hope and truth, now felt like a cursed relic, its pages stained with the tears and blood of those lost to the house's insatiable hunger, and I feared that if I looked too closely, I might see my own name inscribed among the doomed, despite every rational thought screaming to flee, to bury the past, and pretend it never happened. I understood that some stories do not end with light, but continue to writhe in the dark, waiting for the next chapter to be written. In fear and shadow, the scars I carried were invisible, but unyielding, and the nightmares would visit me for the rest of my days. A haunting reminder that the house was not just a place, but a living curse one that fed on the souls of the lost and the brave eternally, waiting for the next victim foolish enough to knock on its door. And as I lay awake that night, listening to the wind whisper secrets through the cracks in my walls, I knew deep in my bones that no matter how far I ran, the house and Harold would never truly let me go. The months after I fled the house became a relentless descent into a waking nightmare, where the boundaries between reality and madness eroded with every breath I took. My days were shadowed by an unshakable dread that clawed at my mind like a persistent disease, gnawing away at my reason until the memories of Harold's cold, merciless smile and the suffocating darkness of that locked room haunted every corner of my consciousness. I found myself walking through empty streets, caught in a fugue where time bent and warped, where familiar faces blurred into indistinguishable masks, and every whisper of wind seemed to carry the echo of that guttural chant I had heard beneath. The ancient oak the chant that had almost swallowed me whole. The diary's pages had become a mirror reflecting the fractured pieces of my soul, ink bleeding into my thoughts like a poison that refused to be cleansed. At night, the nightmares came in waves, visions of the altar bathed in blood, jars filled with writhing shadows instead of flesh, and Harold's eyes burning with a dark fire that promised eternal torment. My phone buzzed with cryptic messages from numbers I couldn't trace, each text dripping with menace. The house never forgets. You are marked. Soon you will join us. I could no longer tell if these were threats from a human or whispers from the darkness itself. But either way, they crushed my spirit. I isolated myself further, cutting off contact with the outside world. My reflection in the mirror, a stranger's haunted visage, eyes hollow and rimmed with shadows. A prisoner of a curse that had claimed more than just my body, had stolen my very essence. Desperate for answers, I returned to the internet's darkest corners, searching for others who might share my torment, others who had faced the house that waits, as the underground forum called it, but each story ended the same way, in silence, disappearance, or madness. Then, one night, I awoke to a presence in my room, a coldness that settled over me like a shroud, the faint scent of damp earth and decay filling my lungs. Harold's voice whispered from the darkness, "It's time." Paralyzed by fear, I felt the shadows stretch and pull, as if the house itself was reaching out to claim me once more. I knew I couldn't run anymore. The nightmare had become my reality, and the final chapter was upon me. Armed with nothing but the fading strength of my shattered will and the cursed diary that had bound me to this horror, I prepared to face the darkness once and for all, knowing that to survive I had to confront the evil not just outside, but deep within myself. The battle for my soul and my sanity was just beginning, and the house was waiting. The night I returned to the house for the last time was a night soaked in rain and silence, the sky heavy with clouds that seemed to press down on the earth like a shroud of despair. And as I stepped through the creaking door, the oppressive weight of decades of darkness pressed against my chest like a living thing. The air was thick with the scent of damp wood, old blood, and something deeper and ancient, hungry evil that pulsed beneath the floorboards and lingered in every shadow. Harold was waiting, but no longer human. His eyes burned with a fire that consumed light and his smile was a cruel mockery of the man I once saw. The locked room was open, the altar bare except for fresh blood smeared across its surface, and the walls seemed to breathe with whispers voices of the lost, the damned, the broken souls trapped in this endless nightmare. I held the diary like a talisman, its pages a map of curses and rituals, and with a voice trembling but fierce, I began to recite the incantation that I hoped would sever the dark bonds once and for all. The house shuddered, walls cracking and groaning as shadows twisted and writhed, reaching for me with claws made of smoke and bone. Harold lunged, a wraith of vengeance and fury, but I stood my ground, the pendant cold against my skin as the words of the ritual burned from my lips. Light exploded from within me, shattering the darkness in a blinding wave that swallowed the house and all its horrors, tearing apart the curses and lies spun for generations. When the light faded, the house was no more than a pile of smoldering ruins, and the heavy silence that followed was broken only by the gentle sound of rain washing away the blood and sorrow. I collapsed to the ground, exhausted and hollow, but free from the nightmare that had haunted me, from the shadows that had tried to claim my soul. Yet even as dawn broke and birds sang in the distance, I knew some darkness never truly dies. It only waits, patient and hungry, for the next soul to wander too close, the next story to be whispered in the dark. And I would carry the scars and the memories always, a reminder that the price of silence is eternal torment, and that some houses never forget.